my name's Kathy Jones, and I'm formerly the volunteer manager with Birds Canada. I come to this position with a research in ornithology and ecologist for a background, plus a lot of work in citizen science and community science. I've had the luxury of working with the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, and more importantly, the people who do the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, which are fantastic people, since about 1995. And it's always been on my portfolio to work with this program. So it's one of my favorites out of all the programs that I work with. Now, my background, for the outline, I'm going to give you some background on our programs and on Birds Canada, some loon history, some basic loon habitat, and what you can do to help, and some summary information. There's no way I can take everything we've learned and known about the species in the last 40 years and put it into 40 minutes. If I just couldn't do it as it is. This will be too much information already, but hopefully it'll give you enough start to get you more interested in looking into other information, as well as to help you on your own lake. So let me tell you a bit about Birds Canada, the organization I work for. In a nutshell, Birds Canada is the #1 go-to organization for anything to do with bird monitoring and conservation Canada. We began as a Long Point Bird Observatory, oh boy, now 60 years ago. And we have evolved into this wonderful national organization. We're a national charitable non-government organization, but we work closely with all levels of partners in governments, including provincial, federal, municipal, conservation authorities, whatever is out there. We partner well with a lot of people. This is our national headquarters, the office that I totally miss because I haven't been there for a year, over a year now, in the base of Long Point on Lake Ontario. But we also have offices right across the country: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Quebec, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC. We have offices in all those places now. Often a single person in the office, but they're offices. Now, the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, of all places, is housed at the headquarters on Lake Erie, so we don't see a lot of breeding loons. And the staff involved, pretty much there's a lot of people involved, but the main staff are myself, Dr. Doug Tozer, who's the water birds and wetlands scientist and the director of the Long Point Wetlands and Waterfowl Research Foundation, and Tracy Barber. She's the one who enters all the data that is sent to us. And with so many programs, we do get a lot of data. Now, for Birds Canada, what we do on any particular day to carry out our mission falls into 3 basic categories. We do citizen science, research and conservation, and education. Our education programs target schools, youth, and urban groups, and our research and conservation programs strive to answer current questions of conservation interest through very targeted fieldwork. But it's our citizen science programs that we are the most known for. We have nearly 40 citizen science programs, with at least one operating in every province and territory across the country. That means we have more than 60,000 people participating in our program at this time. The way these programs work is that we train members of the public to conduct a standardized bird surveys in the field, and then we put the information they collect to good work to advance bird conservation. Now, today's presentation, of course, will focus on just one of these citizen science programs, which is the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey. Lakes Loon, Loons Lake. You can use either one. It's kind of interchangeable, but formally it's a Canadian Lakes Loon Survey. So let's talk about this survey, as this is the reason why we are here. This program is great for lake lovers across Canada, wherever loons breed. You only have to identify one species, so it's really easy compared to some of our surveys that we have out there. Participants select the lakes that they choose to survey. Usually that is based on the lake that they spend the most time on. They make a minimum of 3 visits each to the lake each year to determine the number of territorial pairs, the number of hatchlings per pair, and the number of 6 weeks old chicks. Now we call those large young per pair. Now that's a minimum. A lot of volunteers spend a lot of time on the lakes, and because this survey is literally designed to do in conjunction with your other lake activities, many people, their effort levels are very high, multiple days every month that they go out and they can identify the loon.
Can you turn it off?
Now, what you'll notice this picture here, you have an adult loon and you have a juvenile loon there. The juvenile is about 12 weeks or more, 12 or more weeks old. Now, a nice hint for those who wonder how to tell adult loons from chicks, especially older chicks. Adult loons always have squares on their back. Loon chicks always have scales. So if you ever see a loon with squares, it's an adult. And a necklace, it's an adult. If you ever see scales, you've got this year's young. So that's a great little bit of knowledge for when those birds come back in the fall or in the spring, and you're trying to see what you're identifying there. Now, just as an FYI, you'll see the kayaker here. He's a fair distance off. And we actually recommend that all our loon surveyors try to stay about 100 feet, about 30 meters from the loons. I'm sorry, I still think in feet, but I'm trying to tell people meters as well. So, collecting data on reproductive success is the main purpose of the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, but it has grown and evolved to include monitoring in relation to an ever-changing suite of additional threats, especially climate change. The purpose now also includes strong contributions to loon and lake conservation, particularly private stewardship, and increased public awareness of the importance of loons and healthy lakes. And we'll get into more about that connection of loons and healthy lakes later. So we've collected a lot of data. We've been doing this for 40 years now. So what do we do with it? Now at Birds Canada, we believe data collected should always move forward to educate, increase knowledge, and inform conservation actions. And we've increased our way down that path through years, which is normal for an aging and maturing organization. On the public forefront with the Canadian Lakes Loon Survey, we have released two popular reports, the 20-year report and the 30-year report, 32 years report. And this summer, we released our third report, which is the 40-year data trends and research associated with those data trends. Equally important is research publications. You know, science requires journal research with the body of peers questioning it and making sure it's accurate. So we have always had a large history of research associated with this program, but we've been very lucky recently. The person shown here is Dr. Kristen Bianchini, and we've had her as a postdoc for 2 years. And during that time, she has put out 3 publications in rapid succession. And these are all about common loons, and they all use Canadian Lakes Loon Survey data. And they all aim, at least in part, to try to help identify what is driving the productivity declines that we are seeing in loons. I'm not going to go over these 3 papers. They're all each in their own a talk. And you're going to find you get a lot of that today. You get a lot of stuff you're going to say, I want to learn more. I just can't cover it all. But I'm hoping that there'll be more details on that later. And the 40-year report cover a lot. So let's move on and talk about what exactly is the statistical data that we use for this survey. And this is a reproductive success value. Canada's huge. We have 1 million lakes. There's over 6,000 potential lakes that you can survey loons on right now. And that doesn't include all those other lakes that are not in our database that are equally useful for loon surveys. So we can't really do a population index at this time. So we look at reproductive success, which is a model known parameter for loons and for loon health. And basically we look at 6-week-old chicks, which is the age where we feel in Canada, and statistical modeling and science by many very smart people have come up with this number. And that's the age where they feel chicks lived that long on the lake will survive and fledge off the lake in the fall. And so to decide reproductive success of any area, you take the number of 6-week-old chicks, you divide it by the number of territorial pairs in that area, and you get a basic ratio, like 6 chicks, 10 pairs, to give you an example, is 0.6. Now on this map that I'm showing, you're going to see a dotted line just below the 0.5. That is actually at 0.48. Now they have modeled how many loon chicks a population needs to maintain that population. And that magic number is 0.48. So as long as your loon chick production is above half a chick per year, funny number, I know, but as long as it's above half a chick per year for your total population, you are going to maintain that population. So if any given pair has a chick every other year that survives, they're doing fine. If they have 2 chicks survive every 3 years, they're doing great. You don't have to have chicks survive every year for an individual pair. And the whole population has evolved that way. Now, what you'll also notice looking at that graph is there's been a steady decline in the number of chicks per year produced. It has dropped from 0.7 large young per pair per year when we started to about 0.55 chicks per pair per year now. And that is very concerning. Now, when we look a little further, these are some final spatial scales. These are the declines in loon production in across different regions of Canada. And in Ontario right now, the decline in chick production has been a minus 1.1% decline per year since 1992. Now, in Ontario, we are still above that threshold of 0.8. But if you look at the graph up there under Ontario, it's getting close. In prairie provinces, we bumped up again above the threshold. In Atlantic provinces, we're below the threshold. So there's definitely an issue here with loon reproductive success. And that has to be evaluated. This is a common species. This is a species we associate with Canada. We don't want to lose it. So what the heck is going on? Well, luckily we've had Kristen and Doug, and they've taken a deep dive into the data for answers. Again, this is part of the 40-year report, and I will not go into the details. After considering over a dozen covariates and their interactions on common loon productivity, the ultimate issue seems to be a combination of temperature and fish and mercury and pH. And those things combined decides if it's a good productive lake or not. And these things are driving, in Ontario, at least, a decline. Now, you're going to see on the right-hand side several variables that all of you think are bad for loons, and they very well could be. Shoreline development, boating activity, bald eagles, cormorants. Least one I am concerned about is cormorants, quite frankly. But these things are difficult to tease out information on. We actually do not believe that they are an issue right now on the Canada and the Ontario scales, but they may be issues on specific lakes, but it's not a very simple covariate to look at, because guess what? They all go to the same place. Fishermen want loons in clear lakes. Boaters want loons in clear lakes. Cottagers want loons and wants clear lakes and fish. Bald eagles want clear lakes and fish. They are all attracted to the same lake. What really muddies the water is when it comes to figuring out the effect of these covariates. So, as I said, there's a lot of big picture stuff. Doug is got their 40-year report just about ready to come out. I'm doing my best to convince him to do a talk in the fall on it. Kristen's 3 papers are already available online if people want to look them up. And there's a lot of red flags, a lot of big picture problems there. Mercury, pH, long-range transport of air pollutions is still impacting us, even though we've changed how we care for acid rain and the screening of our factories. Climate change, water pollution, they all have a major effect on these species still today. So what can a local group or even an individual to do to help the situation? It's very easy to get overwhelmed and say, I can't do anything. Well, I disagree with that. I don't undervalue how you each as an individual or as a group can help that big picture. You can vote, you can use your purchasing power. you can advocate, you can make changes to large-scale lifestyles, you can make a big difference to the big picture. But today I want to take this down to the individual lake level, specifically looking at Dog and Cranberry lakes, and show options that you can do on those lakes and the other lakes in the area that can make a difference. Because if everyone works towards making simple changes on their own lake, you're going to decrease a lot of the stressors, and it may help us keep these common loons common in the future, which is our goal, is to make sure we keep the species. So basic loon knowledge, which is not that simple. Now I'm going to try and share the poll. See if we can pull up that poll there and show you guys, just to give you, let me just see here. Which one do you want? This one. Okay. So you guys see the poll there? So let's go over some of these results. Are loons seabirds or lake birds? Well, most of you guys think they're lake birds, which is funny, and a lot of people do. Interesting enough, they spend the majority of their life on the ocean. They also have a salt gland in the skull between their eyes, and that removes the excess salt from the food in the water and excretes it. So I kind of lean towards a seabird for this one, and certainly not a duck. What determines the size of a lake that a loons need? Length of open water, surface area, productivity of the lake, all of the above. Most of you got that right. It's not as straightforward, as simple as it implies, but all of them have an impact on whether that lake is good for loons or not, and how big of an area you need per loon pair, but more because I think surface area, they're correlated, right? The length of open water, surface area, and productivity of a lake are all correlated in the house. Monica, I think, is telling us that we can all look at the poll results ourselves. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Do you guys see the poll results right now? Could somebody give me a heads up or a yes, no on that?
Yeah, you can see them, but you got to click on the little polls icon at the bottom of the screen.
So you don't see it on my screen. You know why you don't see it on my screen? Because I forgot to hit share. No. Can you see them now? Technology is a wonderful thing. So you can see the results now, right? Cool.
Not on your screen.
So what else is there? How many chicks do they usually have? Never more than 2, 1 to 3, or a gaggle. You're right. Usually 1 to 3. With the odd occasion, and when I say the odd occasion, we've had a handful of occurrences of 4 loons chicks. But we don't think they come from eggs. We think they come from adoption occurrences, and that's a whole nother article. And if you have questions about that, we can answer it later. But normally you see 1 to 3. If you ever see 4 chicks with a pair, I want to hear about it. Now, I warn you, I will ask you about 100 questions after you tell me you see 4 chicks with a loon pair and want to see photographic evidence. But it's such a unique scientific event. I track it very carefully. So, why do you think that Dog and Cranberry lakes do not have enough loon chicks? I don't know if I can see them all here. Let me go back to the, let me see. Nope, that's my timer. You don't want that. I'm pulling the other screen in over. I'm hoping you guys can see it. And it doesn't tell me anything new. It looks like the majority of people think it's too much boat traffic. I would argue we're not seeing that. It no doubt impacts and adds stressors to the loons. But as I said, we're seeing high levels of productivity on lakes with a lot of boats. And that's a really tough one to figure out. I don't say you should undervalue that and you should work to limit the amount of boat traffic, but it's not what we're seeing as the big impact. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to my main presentation here. And you guys just see the loon curves again?
Yes.
Yes. All right, cool. So we're back on track. So what we have here is basically the loon life cycle. They start in the oceans where they overwinter. And in this area, they most likely overwinter in either the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean, it's a tough call to say where they go to from the Rideau and the Cataraqui area. Both are equally likely. And they will be in what we call the near shore waters. So they're out from the shoreline, but they're not too far out. And then in the early spring, they come back and they will, well, can you see the notes, but no longer the screen? Well, I got the wrong thing up here. There, how's that? Is that better? Do you still see my notes, folks?
Yes.
Yep. We see both.
We see both, Kathy. I didn't think it was a problem, but I guess something else has shown up.
Well, let's try this one. What do you see now?
Still the same.
I don't know. All right, what do we got here? PowerPoint slideshow. That's the one I want. This is why you only have a couple screens open. What do you see now?
Still the same thing, Kathy.
No, full screen.
Perfect.
Oh, it just switched on mine. It's good now.
Okay, it's slow. Thank you for your patience, both. I could talk on for hours and not realize that there's a problem. So anyways, where was I? Oh, they come to the lakes early in the spring, usually right around ice out. And if you know your loons, they're uncanny in knowing when ice out is. And that is, we think, because they stage up for bigger lakes and they literally fly out and wait and see when their ice is open and they go in. Now, they don't immediately nest. I will say in the Rideau Lakes area, I don't know so much about your lake, but a little farther north, would that be northeast of you?
Yes.
Yes, they tend to, for some reason, they have the odd nest that nests early and they have chicks quite early, but usually they spend the first month or two quietly on the lake feeding and strengthening the pair bond and defending their territory. They build body condition before they start laying eggs. The nests are very simple, as you will see in the picture of the two loons on the floating platform. And the eggs there, they're just a simple scrape with a little bit of rigs and twigs maybe thrown in. I'm not so sure they actually throw them in. I think they're just too lazy to remove them. They put the eggs on that. And the eggs are laid usually in late May, early June, usually 1 to 3 days apart. If a nest is lost, perhaps they will nest into July. And usually there's 1 to 2 eggs, maybe 3. Incubation takes about 27 and a half days. And usually the new family leaves immediately after hatch. As many of you probably know, parental care is very high. Both members of the pair feed and brood the young. And while adults may fly elsewhere for the food to feed the chicks only are fed from food of the lake. Now, this is what makes them such great representatives of lake quality. Their whole rearing and whatever keeps that loon healthy and alive, that chick healthy and alive, comes from that specific lake they are. So they really are a good representation of the health of the lake. Now, if chicks survive to 6 weeks, they are expected to fledge off the lake in the fall. There is some questions on that decision now in the U.S. because of increased lost bald eagles. But I would argue that if the particular area the birds have evolved with bald eagles, they get kind of used to it and they learn to respond accordingly. So chicks are cared for 11 to 12 weeks. But after about the 8th week, they're finding about 50% of their own food. In the fall, the adults leave the lake first. In the very middle picture, you see again an adult loon with the squares on the back and a juvenile about 12 weeks old with the scales on the back. So those adults will leave first, and a few weeks later, or I don't know, a couple days, a few weeks later, whenever they're ready, the juveniles will leave. They again will go to the nearshore waters of the oceans or the Gulf of Mexico, and the juveniles will stay there for at least 2 years before they start migrating back again. But we believe that most loons are at least 4 years or not older, if not older, before they breed for the first time, and then the process all begins again. So the biggest question I have for you is what decides the size of a lake that a loon needs? And we discussed that a little bit before. And so surprisingly few people say the length of the lake, and maybe that's because you're on such a big lake. But it gets really interesting because we know that they need at least 24 hectares, and it may range up to 80 hectares depending on the productivity of the lake. But if the lake is not big enough, the loons cannot fly off it. So in much of Canada, particularly in Eastern Canada, because Eastern Canada has bigger loons, and we have big loons on Eastern Canada and in Western Canada, and in Central Canada, they're smaller, and their smallest common loons are found on the prairies. So prairie loons will get off a much smaller lake than an Ontario loon, which is a really cool feature of the species. So lake length comes into play, and so does surface area and productivity, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Now, the pictures you see here, the top left-hand one is a classic associated with loons, lake associated with loons. They prefer clear lakes. They normally have to be larger than 24 hectares with abundance of small fish, numerous islands, and an irregular shoreline to create cover. The bottom two photos are typical nesting locations. Now, it's only time of year that allows you to see the loon on the left versus you can't see the loon on the right. The loon on the left, that's a natural nest. It's a raised mound of something in a wetland, which is their preferred area. The nest on the right was put in the Jasper Parks area, and it's on a platform because of water level controls on that lake. And it is a really pretty nest, and that's the ideal looking platform nest, in my opinion, what you're seeing right there. Now, the top right-hand picture of that loon sitting on that beach, that's pretty atypical. We actually have something like that occurring in Alberta right now. But this is one of my favorite photos. It was sent to me from Chapleau by a field biologist, quite concerned because she had a loon nesting in the middle of a public beach. And she said, what do I do? My first response was rope it up, because they're feisty. That loon will go after a kid that gets too close to it, and a kid will decide that's a wonderful thing to pet. But this brings a very important point with loons, is how they find the nesting site. The male loon finds a nesting site, and they use a hit and miss process. They will come to the lake, they will choose a spot, they will try it out. If it works, they stay there. If it doesn't work, the next time they try to breed, they'll move to another spot. And they'll keep doing this until they find the right spot that works. Now, there's some pros and cons with this. The biggest con is it takes them a long time to get their acting gear. So they have many years where they're trying to reproduce young, where they don't get anywhere. They also, for this reason, they feel it's the most likely reason why male loons will fight to death over a territory, which is incredibly rare for any species to do this, but this is most likely the reason why. And then finally, you'll have wondering if suddenly your loons are not doing as well on the nesting site as it used to do. You may want to think about, is this the same loon pair? They're nesting in a weird place. Is it because they have a health issue? Or is it just a new pair and the male doesn't have his act together? They do feel that on average, it takes about 8 years for a loon to find a good nesting site. So that's a long time to try to get your starter home going. So what makes a good loon lake? This is not your lake. This is Angle Lake, Saskatchewan, which is arguably the most productive loon lake in Canada. It is not the biggest lake. It is not the lake that has the most loons, but per hectare, it has the most per hectares. Where if you look at the maximum number of loon pairs it has ever had, which is 46, that's about 30 hectares per pair of loon. Now, what makes a lake like this ideal? One is very little water level fluctuations. Between May and July 10th, when they're nesting, loons can't walk, so they nest very close to the water. And because of that, they need to have a water level changes of no more than 6 inches up or 12 inches down during the breeding season. And that is the deciding factor on lake location. Other things might be islands. Islands are great for nesting, fewer predators, fewer mammalian predators. This lake is relatively shallow. It's highly productive, and I'll show you an image later to show that a little bit better. It has a lot of surface area, lots of perimeter, and we know that perimeter, we know, is related with this behaviorally with this species for setting up territories. The less they can see each other, the more shoreline, the more perimeter. It not only makes them more lake more productive, but the loons can't see the other loons, are happier. You get more pairs on the lake. But we know that surface area was one of those things directly connected to number of loon produced. So higher surface area lakes produced more chicks successfully. This lake has lots of vegetation. It has areas that are well sheltered from wave and wind action. Avian predators, I don't know how limited it is. Bald eagles have always been pretty populated in Saskatchewan. So I would assume that there's always been avian predators there, and perhaps they just learn to evolve with them. Now, Monica has asked, what is their lifespan? Good question. Trying to remember, I would think it's less than 20 years on average, but the oldest living pair of loons, I think they just identified them as being together, or the oldest member of the living pair is at least 25 years old. And that one is still reproducing in Mount Sinai National Forest in Michigan. So they could be living anywhere from 20 to 30 years, but only a certain period of that would be highly productive. So here are your lakes. They might look a little bit more familiar. So their lakes are pretty cool. They have a lot of perimeter. They have a lot of surface area. They're quite large, so they should be technically do very well for loons. You see, I have estimates, the number of pairs of 11 to 39 for Dog Lake, and 8 to 27 for Cranberry Lakes. And that's just a total ballpark. I don't know how many loons you have on these lakes. And that is based on the idea that loon pairs need 24 to 80 hectares per pair. What will decide that is all those other factors: productivity, amount of fish, amount of habitat, appropriate nesting sites, how many little sheltered spots they can get to put the nest and not see the other loons. All those things come into play when setting up territory. On other issues, they seem pretty good. Acidification is not a huge barrier for loons. It decreases loon reproductive success, and these lakes, I think, are quite good. Eutrophication is high. That may affect the fish population. To the best of my knowledge, invasive species are neither here nor there. Now, I just saw a wonderful picture out of Quebec showing a common loon eating massive goldfish. So it all depends, I guess, on the invasive species, how it affects the species. Now, both of these lakes are drowned lakes, if I recall right, and you probably all know that better than I do. That
Yes.
may improve productivity. It may also decrease productivity if there are chemicals or toxins in the soil that affects the water. So it could go either way with that. But it looks like both have healthy lake loon fish populations as well.
Yes.
So this is my final little bit on lake productivity. Again, this is a photo of England Lake, Saskatchewan, and this is only one half of the lake. But I wanted to show you all the marshlands around this lake, and it clearly becomes clear that this is the breeding area for fish, and that is the main food supply for loons. It also provides a lot of good habitat for loons. So those are two of the really important features that you need for healthy loon survival. When we look at dog and cranberry, and this is from the Ducks Unlimited Canada Wetland Inventory, which is usually relatively accurate. You have a lot of little bits of wetland, a little bits of marsh, but not any big massive ones. So that may play into the number of pairs you have on the lake. Now you notice that I'm not saying the number of pairs you have on the lake. And that is because we don't know. The last time for my study that unless it happened in 2019 and I haven't seen the data yet, or 2020 and I haven't seen the data yet, this particular set of lakes has not been surveyed since 1990. Or at least not to a large extent. I think we may have had one territory surveyed quite consistently. So without that information, we don't know how many pairs are. We don't know how successful they are. And so I would argue that to begin with, you need to track and find out whether your lake is doing well. And one of those great lakes that are doing well, and we move forward from that. But there's a lot of other things you can do if you find a problem, but there's too much detail. We're not going into there, just putting this up to scare you a little. This is where you want to concentrate your time, just figuring out where your sections are and going forward with that. So that's a lot of life history and biology and habitat, very quickly done. So the next question, what can you do? How can you make your lake better for loons? And I'm going to go over basically 2 signs that we have that describes the best things you can do for loons as an individual and as a lake. And you can take those as food for thought and think of what you yourself and your lake association can move forward with. And if you're involved, as I've noticed a few people on the webinar are involved with the Loon survey, you've probably seen all this stuff before. So first off is be involved. Give support, not necessarily the Loon survey, although we always welcome donations. I have to be real here. We are a not-for-profit, but just supporting your lake association. Make sure that they have the money for advocating for your lake and supporting your time and getting involved, and maybe raising awareness through education, but also through actions as well. All these things can make a difference, particularly for this combination of lakes, because as I mentioned, not a lot of data has been collected. The survey is incredibly easy. It's great for families to do. Like you look counting loons, they're not hard to count. If you have binoculars, it's handy, but they're really not hard to count. And Carrie pulled together this map of potential sections, and I think you'll see she needs about a dozen different teams or individuals to survey those sections. And there's a lot of open water in there. Remember that loons stay in the little shallows, and you just have to look at that open water once in a while. It's not a big deal. It's more finding the territories and tracking the territories. So it's a really easy program for anyone to get involved with. The next thing is the boating activity on your lake. And these are big lakes, so I'm sure there's lots of boats. And I've noticed that some of you have already said you think this is a concern for the lake. And there's a few things that can make difference. And the first thing is just to steer clear. We recommend about 100 feet, 30 meters from any loon. Wake boats are a totally different ballgame. They have a much more powerful water action involved with them. So you want to say 200 to 300 feet, 60 to 100 meters from any loon. I'm going to let Robert in while we wait here because, oh, you got him, never mind. And paddlers, don't undervalue the impact you can make as well, because you can get right close up to a loon and distract it quite readily when they're supposed to be caring for the young. And that's the whole goal here. Whenever loons have to deal with boating traffic and people and other avenues of stressors, they're not caring for the chicks, they're not feeding their chicks, they're not doing the work that they have to do to keep the chicks healthy. So every time that happens, it decreases the health of that chick, it increases the vulnerability of the chick, and increases the likelihood of predation or just not getting enough food. You'll notice in the one corner here, you have a loon in what I call the penguin position. That is an extreme panic position that a loon does and so it is something you want to make sure you don't see. And if you see it, back up and move away. It's a lousy picture because I won't use pictures of most places of that particular behavior, because if you're seeing it, you're doing something wrong. Slow down, play smart. This is a new addition to our Loon Alert signs because the knowledge coming out clearly shows the impact of wake boats. I understand using them, like they're fun. They're slow, they're safer than the old-fashioned water skiing in many ways, but they have these big impactful weights that the powers clearly show take further distances to dissipate, and they also have an impact in the vertical column depth of the lake that can stir up sediments in the lake floor, increasing the pollutants and mercury and whatever toxins are on that lake floor. It can bring it back up to the surface. So we recommend they stay in the deeper waters, 24 feet deep waters, at least 300 feet, 100 meters from shore. And it's perfectly reasonable for lake associations to think about their lakes and perhaps choose a play zone for these things to be used in. And it should be noted as well that 100 feet from shore, there isn't legally, you're not supposed to go faster than 100 feet of shore. That is a law, but that's not enough distance for a wake boat. And I'm taking a while here, aren't I? Sorry about that. Dispose responsibly. We've all seen the images of dying animals because they're entangled in garbage. Here I'm showing things that you might find near the lake, but doesn't necessarily have to be near the lake. And I think we're all learned this lesson over the last few years. But it's a death sentence for an animal to be tangled this way. And so it's something you want to stop at all costs. And the best way to do that is to be careful with your garbage and dispose of it responsibly, including things that, and I as a child would never thought of. You don't leave hooks on the tree. You don't leave hooks to the fish. These kind of things you don't do. It's like I said, if a water bird gets a hold of that, it's a death sentence. Speaking of which, here's a few more pictures. Birds like this, they can't dive. They can't, they may be able to dive, but they can't fly off the lake. They may be able to partially feed, but they may not be able to fully feed. Now, on the right-hand side, you see a picture of a jig and a loon x-ray. That's a death sentence for sure. We don't know the impact in Canada. The US are considering it the second major death mortality of loons, and they know the numbers. It looks like right now it's a larger tackle. So this is a more expensive tackle, and I would suggest just make sure you get it back into the boat. Make sure that you don't, if a loon starts chasing your tackle, stop fishing for a little bit, move on to another fishing spot. Use your purchasing power here and buy non-lead tackle. I recognize that good lures are very expensive, but so I don't think it's going to make that great of a difference if it's non-lead. But we won't start seeing those things readily available and easy to find until we start actually purchasing those tackle. Also, point source pollutions are huge. So think about that lake that you're on, that you want to be exactly what you want, which is the same kind of lake conditions as the loons, as the fish, as everybody. And to do that, you want to limit what goes into that lake that's bad. So cleaning solutions, washing cars, fertilizers, taking care of fueling boats, having a healthy septic system. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but it's worth repeating. And I'm sure your Lake Association and Watersheds Canada and many other programs have great information to share with you about this. I mentioned before that you can do help with the big picture by reducing your impact of using less electricity and fossil fuels. That can help as well. I believe this is my final helping sign. And back to keeping your lake healthy. You have a healthy lake for you and the loons and everybody. It's a much better environment. And the best way to do that is to have naturalized, vegetized shoreline. Hard shorelines rarely do the trick for a healthy lake. They just don't have enough of the natural features that the lake need. Watersheds Canada and the Love Your Lake program, I think Dog and Cranberry Lake is working with these people, has wonderful tools that you can work with, and you can readily soften the shoreline of the lake, which not only makes it look pretty, it helps pollinators, it helps birds, it helps your loons, it helps your fish, helps your erosion. Lots and lots of good reasons to do this. So that's a very, very quick talk covering a lot of territory, and I'm hoping I have not overwhelmed or bored everybody. There's a lot of information on our website that will help you if you want to help loons. And the final slide I need to put up is a thank you. Thank you first for Dog and Cranberry Lake Association for having me. Second, to the Canadian Lake Loon Survey volunteers. All that 40 years of data is their doing, and I can't undervalue their importance. And also to Birds Canada supporters, donors, and members. At this time, the Loon Survey is free. Anyone can participate. They just have to sign up and ideally send me the data. But there is no formal funding associated with this 40-year program. So it's the supporters and donors and members of Birds Canada that pay for it. So anyone who wants to support us is really appreciated. All those other members sitting on this graph are the ones that help fund the analysis and the reporting for the 3 recent publications and the 40-year report. So they allowed us to take that next step and go towards that area of being able to get the information out there. Okay, I have I'm going to try this and see if it works. And if it works, we'll find out. Oh, and Carrie, this is it. If you have any questions while people watch Loon swim, I'm happy to answer them.
Terrific. Once the video's done, there are a couple of questions that have come in, and I also want to do a formal thank you.
Let me just show you this one here. This is great because it really shows the loon swimming well and the exact kind of fish they like, which is emerald shiners and perch. And this is from Lake Simcoe, which is a staging area in the fall. All right, I'll shut this off because I could watch this an hour, but it may be a little bit too much for me. And that's it, guys. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. There are definitely some questions about the mute swans, Kathy.
Yes, and I brought a slide about that. And loons and swans. It's on our radar, right? At this point in time, on the big picture for Ontario, we don't see it to be a significant issue. They tend not to be moving too far north. Cranberry Dog Lakes is about as far as north as they've gotten for the mute swans. And the habitat does not fully overlap with the preferred shield lakes that the common loons like. So, and the big picture, it doesn't seem to be a problem. Does that mean it's an issue on specific lakes? Maybe. We personally feel that there's more threatening issues, and by dealing with those, be it tackle or habitat or humans annoying loons, they're all more important than that. So that is where I would lead. Be very careful if you want to look into mute swan control. The laws right now in Ontario and Canada are a little vague. Definitely talk to people who really know this stuff before you start anything. Yeah.
Good answer. There was a question about the loon calls, Kathy, and if you can tell us a little bit about what the different calls might mean.
Well, there's 3 main calls. Now you're making me work. For mute, wail, tremolo, and yodel. You are making me work here. The yodel is for males only, and that's actually the way you tell it's a male. It's one of 2 ways you can tell it's a male loon. The other one I think you all can figure out. And it's really cool because it's the one that you do when they kind of stretch themselves out in the lake all in one direction and call, turning all around in different directions. And that's when they are saying, this is my space. You're not welcome here. The tremolo, which is like a variation high-pitched laughing type call, and probably where some of the names for the loons come from, potentially. It's more of a panic call or an aggression call. It's also the only call done in flight. So they will call in flight using that. The wail is used between loons, be they partners or be they loons on different locations on the lake, just kind of like a here am I, where are you kind of conversation, long distance conversations. The mew and the hoot are just little wee quiet calls that are used between the pairs close together and between the young close together. Cornell All About Birds probably has all the calls on the website for the common loon. So that's a great place to start looking at if you want to learn more about the calls.
Wonderful. So at this point, Kathy, do you think it would be helpful if you stop sharing the screen and then we can see
me?
people? Yeah, see you and see people.
Sure, we can do that.
And then,
Am I off now? Yes.
yes, that's wonderful.
Okay.
There have been a couple of other questions that have come in, and before we get to those, I would just like to thank you so much for the informative, incredibly thorough presentation, making it specific to dog and cranberry so that we can really see some interesting, unique things about our lakes that we are dealing with on a number of occasions. And I think there are some fascinating things that have been given to us about what we can do as individuals, which is wonderful. So I'm going to go into the chat box and see, somebody asked about nesting platforms, and I think that's a good one for you to address.
It is. Now I can send this that slide to Carrie after the fact, but that's an advanced solution and monitoring project. It's platforms. The biggest thing with platforms, first off, is if you place them on a territory or a nest where they're not needed, because loons have so much site fidelity, if that platform turns out not to be a good choice for them and is not maintained, it can decrease loon reproductive success. So they're more of a management tool for loon nesting problems. And you want to make sure that problem exists before you use them. So there are standards in place in North America for the use of platforms, and that information is on our website. And the very first rule is that you know your territories and you know where they are. And the second rule is you know you have no chicks hatching on that territory for 3 years at least. Survivorship of young has nothing to do with it because they get off that nest thing within 48 hours. So you want to know that there is no hatch for at least 3 years at that nest site before you even consider it. Because if there is hatch, you don't need a platform. That's not your problem. Your problem is somewhere else. Cons, they need to be maintained. You have to literally commit to maintain that sucker until you leave your cottage. And then when you leave, you have to pull it out of the water and take it away from the loons, because if it sinks, they will continue to nest on it even when it's no longer a good platform. Cons, well, they can shift. They really need to be taken out at least once a year and dried out, because in my opinion, we shouldn't be putting more plastics in there. So you should use the wooden platforms. And there's some specific models that work well. A lot of people think they can do a better job, and I tend to stick with the ones that we know from research works. But you do need to take them out at least once a year and dry them out, bring them back in. You need to get there right after ice out, and you need to make sure they're in place and they haven't shifted with ice if you took them out in the summer and put them back in the fall. And they have to be in territory. I can't represent that point. We know that loons will fight to the death. We know that they're very aggressive over territories when they know their space. So picture on your lake that you have 8 different loon pairs, and they've all got themselves nicely split out. And then all of a sudden, there's a brand new nesting site smack dab in between the pair 8 and 9. What happens there? Do they fight over it and lose both their already productive nesting sites? Does another loon come in and then you have massive territorial disputes? Eventually, that will maybe work itself out if you add that territory in, but how many years of chicks are you going to lose in the process? Because remember, the time that they look for nesting sites is actually in the summer. And if they find a good nesting site, a loon will come in and kill the chicks of the existing pair so they can get the site. So you don't want to place platforms where they will not do good. Where you need them, which is water level fluctuations with no hatch for 3 years within a known territory, they can make a big difference. They can increase your productivity greatly, but you want those 3 things in place before you even consider them.
What a wonderful, comprehensive answer. And I think that leads us to how important it is for us to embark on this survey for these lakes. So I'm thrilled that we're starting, even if it is the 40th year of the Canadian Loons Lake Survey. But better late than never. We have a small team that's already been out looking and searching. And if there's anyone else interested in being involved in this survey on Dog and Cranberry, you can certainly get in touch with me. And for people on other lakes, with other lake associations, talk to your lake association and talk to Kathy. I can tell you she is a phenomenal resource. And I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to work with her on this small project. Thank her for taking an evening out of her busy schedule. And I think everyone here, based on the fact that we started with 35 and there are still 35 people there, that tells me one really important thing is people have stuck with this program, and already the thank yous and the accolades are coming in. And these Zoom presentations are challenging, but I guess if we all put our video on and did a clap, can we do that? I don't know if we can, or we'll lose all our bandwidth and have it crazy. But if people would like to put their video on and even their audio, and if we lose it now, then that's okay. And we'll give an applause meter for those who would like to. So let me see if we can see other people. There we go. Lots of clapping and smiling people. Hooray.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to have this platform where I can reach people so readily, because there's so many lakes in Canada. It's hard to reach them all.
Yes. Yes.
So can you tell us how to join this survey? Like, where do we go? Like,
if you go to birdscanada.org/loons,
okay,
and there's a lot of information right there, including a position description form that explains the program. And from there, there's also access to the volunteer portal, and that's where you sign up. And you just have to register, and you're signed up. Unless, of course, you're on Dog and Cranberry Lake, and then you need to talk to Carrie.
No, we're a small lake, not too far away, Inverry Lake, not too far away from Dog Lake.
And the more lakes are better. We actually don't have all lakes in Ontario covered. There's a lot of them. So a lot of them we do have a bit of a history with. So the more you get surveyed, the better. And thank you guys so much for having me today.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.